Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor and one of the accessibility wizards here at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am the other accessibility wizard here at Chax Training Consulting. And Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists. And if you'd like your certification, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certifications and learn more about the accessible document specialist or web accessibility specialist, or even the CPAC, which I am blanking out at the moment on what that actually is. Core certification in core accessibility principles.
Yeah, that's a good question, Dax. I don't even remember off the top of my head.
Somebody leave a comment in either below this in the YouTube video or on LinkedIn and remind me again what CPAC is. But it is that general certification that says, hey, I am aware and understand the core principles of accessibility and am an advocate. And so, yeah, the IAAP is a great organization that helps a lot of people understand and be more aware of people with disabilities. So.
Yeah, the CPAC is the Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies. So
I was pretty close.
Stands for. Yeah, you were close, but yeah, like the CPAC is that's a certification that's good for somebody who is just trying to demonstrate their accessibility knowledge. It's not really
It's where you start.
It's where you start. Like if you have that certification, it doesn't really say that you can do anything, but you understand the principles of accessibility. And that's also important in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think if you're an HR manager or if you're art director, or if you are just starting out on your accessibility journey to be a web accessibility specialist or CPAC, an accessible document specialist, it's a great place to start to get a broad brush awareness of all the different types of disabilities, the social models, the rules and regulations around the world. It is not a test of all the different rules. You don't need to study a lot of the technical aspects, but you do need to have a broad knowledge of accessibility. So yeah.
You really do. I know there's a lot of questions regarding like regulations in other countries, right? You know, I mean, it is a pretty broad brush certification, but certainly has value. Definitely.
Yes.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, today, Chad, so a long time ago in one of the podcasts, we had asked, hey, if you've got a document you're stuck on or a concept that you want help with, send us your PDFs. And
somebody took us up on that offer.
So today's podcast comes to us from a subscriber, a listener of our podcast. I'll leave their name out just as a matter of privacy. But they asked, how do you deal with legal documents with line numbers in it? And it got us to start a deeper conversation about line numbers in general and kind of the different types of things. There are two types of documents with legal documents with line numbers in them. The first type is the one I think I'm more familiar with, which is legal pleading. And it's almost like a left-hand rule. And then it's got every line has a number, 1, 2, 3 on down through the document, so that someone could say on line 327, you said this, right? And that's the legal pleading document.
Yeah. Well, and the benefit of that, right, of course, is like, when two people are trying to look at the same document, typically they're not in the same room together. They're, remote or whatever. And one person wants to call out a specific area of the document. To your point, Dax, they can reference, okay, go to page 17, line 43. And that way they're both at the exact correct spot within the document. Although we did discover, Dax, with legal pleading, the numbers are sequential throughout the document. So they'll start at line 1 on page 1, and they'll end at line 4000 on page 53.
All right, so here we have on screen, you can see we have a legal document. It starts at line 1, and there's content on the left-hand side. For those of you who are watching or listening to this on your favorite podcast platform, left-hand side of the screen, there are numbers, there's a double rule, and then on the right-hand side of the screen is the actual content. And every line has a number and corresponding content. And that's kind of the typical thing we think of when we think of that legal pleading. However, we were made aware by the person who sent us the original email that there is another type of document. And this document doesn't have numbers all the way down the left-hand side, but it is arranged by headings. So finding of facts, best interest fact number 1, best interest fact number 2, right? And then each of the numbers are really associated with a topic as this content is being laid out, right?
So let's talk about these two different types of documents, right? So in the first case, right, we're talking about legal pleading, right? And with legal pleading, they said you could build this a number of different ways. A lot of the cases we saw, Dax, in Microsoft Word, they added basically a text frame to the left-hand side of the page, and then it kind of numbered sequentially, and it was meant to kind of line up to the content in the document. I would say if you're going to do this, you should really plan out the document and set your line spacing for the legal pleading to the same line spacing in the document.
In fact, the sample that we're looking at on screen here, for those of you, again, just listening to the podcast, the text, this placeholder text, doesn't actually quite line up with the numbers. And in fact, some of the templates we saw, the numbers are not part of the live content. They're in the header footer area as either a floating text box off to the left, and that creates a problem because then you have the possibility of your numbers in the floating text box not lining up with the live content. And so in this case, we could set this paragraph spacing to 9 point, but you can see it's already starting to get off as we're down to line number 12. And as we get down to lines 22 and 23, we're way off anyway. So
yeah,
building this can be very precarious from a visual standpoint, which translates into a precarious situation from an accessibility standpoint, right?
Exactly. So, if this type of document is not a document that the typical user is going to be building, but if you're ever in this situation where you need to, what I would tell you to do is level set yourself, set your line spacing for the legal pleading to the same line spacing as the document. And then you're at least setting yourself up for success because everything should synchronize and line up with an appropriate number.
So you were talking about earlier about, okay, if we could design it in any way we wanted to, what is the best way, knowing that I'm designing this document so that a person using assistive technology could understand the line numbers, but not necessarily be required to hear them as they're reading the document, only by reference when they choose?
And that's really the sticking point, right? Because, when you and I were looking at this document and we're kind of evaluating this, we're like, okay, how do we make this accessible, right? And, you've got your tag structure over on the right, but that's only the content on the page. Now, we had talked about, like, in theory, what you could do is tag every number, and this is not for the faint of heart, right? But you could tag every number and then slot it into the appropriate location in the tags tree. Well, the big problem with that is that it's going to be a horrible user experience, right? And, Dax, you and I, we put user experience above all else, right? And so the idea that somebody, if they just wanted to read the document, they're going to hear a number every 15 words as they're reading this document. It's not going to be a very good experience.
Well, what's also interesting is that programmatically, you should be tagging those line numbers as a reference, right? The right tag for that as a reference. But what does NVDA and JAWS call out when it gets to a reference tag?
Nothing.
Link. No, it says link. Think about a TOC. Why do we hear link when we have a TOC? It's because we have a link inside a reference, and NVDA says link when it gets to the reference, and then says link again when it gets to the link. That's why you hear link in your TOC. And so we teach people, change that reference to a P tag so that you only hear the link once. So programmatically, the correct tag for those legal numbers should be link, but we know the screen reader user experience would be terrible because you're going to hear link, name, link, address, and that's not really what we're trying to go at.
Yeah.
So you had a great solution for what to do instead.
Well, we kind of both had a great solution because, Dax and I were sitting here talking about it, and Dax said to me, I know what I would do. And so I was looking at the document and I'm like evaluating, and I said, I think what I would do is I would make it a table.
Exactly.
And Dax shook his head. He's like, absolutely. Right. So, by making it a table, so if you can envision this, those of us who are listening, all the numbers would be in one column, and then all the text in the document would be in another column.
And what would happen there is then you'd want to use the table summary to tell the user this legal document is contained within a table. Column 1 is the line number, and column 2 is the actual content. That gives the screen reader user perfect reference as to how the content is organized.
Right. And what it does is it allows the user to only read the content in the document if they choose to. But if they are working with somebody and they tell them to go to a particular line on a particular page, they can easily do that by navigating down the first column.
Well, we found out what the shortcut key is. We didn't know this before the podcast. I did a little Google search because you said, what did you say?
Well, because I said, well, that's going to be a crappy user experience because you can only read one row of the table at a time. So even if you've got a paragraph of text, that's going to be divided into, say, 8 rows, and you're going to have to read it one row at a time. But you discovered,
instead of pressing the down arrow for every single line, NVDA actually has, and I got to assume JAWS has this as well, the ability to read a single column only. And so I looked it up, and in fact, there is. So if you hold down the NVDA key plus Control and Alt and press the up arrow. So normally you would hold down Control Alt and press arrows. But if you just add the NVDA key to that and press the up arrow alone, it's going to read the column you're in from the very top cell to the very bottom cell automatically.
Did you say up arrow?
The up arrow. Yeah.
So insert Control Alt up arrow.
Yes.
Will start reading from the top of the column down.
Okay. However, here's the thing that I don't think really works well is, what do I do if I'm halfway through that column? Maybe I'm halfway down the page and I decide, well, I want to keep reading from this point forward and just read down this column. I bet, and I'd have to do some tests, but I bet you're screwed. I bet that it's going to only read from the top of that column again, all the way through the bottom. I would bet to say there isn't a way to do that with just this from this point forward where my
You don't think
is.
Down arrow would do it?
No, because
so wherever you are in the table, I would think you could do insert Control Alt down arrow to say read from this point down. Now we'd have to test that. I don't know for sure. I'm just prognosticating here.
Maybe. And I guess we'll just have to find out. Again,
Yeah.
guys, this is really what separates people who consider themselves experts from those who aren't, is that we're going to pose the question. And when we get done with this podcast, we're going to find out what the answer is, because we're going to go do it. We're going to run it on a test document. I think a lot of people ask that question. Oh, I wonder how this sounds in a screen reader. And then they stop and they don't actually go do the work. If you want to be considered an expert in your field, take the extra effort, go find it out. Figure out what that is. And then you'll know more than the next person. Because what separates an expert from a novice? I know more than you. Why do I know more than you? Because I go and do the research to find out, right? And I think that that's a key thing. So going back to what we said, this really focuses on if I have control over the source file and I'm giving someone a template to start the process. Because again, if somebody just hands me a PDF with legal pleading in it, this solution is not going to work for you. To actually turn this into a table, we did do a sample in Common Look, because Common Look has the ability to select blocks of text and turn it into a table. However, it worked in some parts of the document, but not other parts of the document. So I wouldn't say that it is a perfect solution. So if I'm given a PDF already with line numbers, legal pleading in it, what we're talking about with this table solution would be really arduous to set up.
Yeah.
So the other type of document that we were given, this from our listener, is an outline view of a document. And I have it on screen here, and there's a couple of intro paragraphs, and then it starts out with a couple of headings, and then a numbered system, 1 through, in this case, it goes 1 to number 8. And then there's another heading, and then 9 through 14, and then another heading. And his question was, is it a bad user experience for the user to hear heading level 2, list 2 items, heading level 2, list 2 items, and so on and so forth, when it's really a continuous numbered system?
Yeah. And, when he approached us, Dax, what he was doing is he was restructuring all those list items into one single list, because he thought they needed to exist in a cohesive list. And the problem with that approach is, well, you could do that, but now that list has to occur either before all those headings or after all those headings, but you can't have headings existing in between list items within a list, right?
I think you can, but here's the thing. You'd have to move all those H2s inside of the L body. Remember, how do you add a paragraph in between a list item? You'd have to move all those heading level 1s and 2s into, well, probably 2s, into the L body of the number. And then you'd have to set the placement value from block to inline. So I think technically you probably could do it, but man, I would not want to do it. And I don't know that PDF UA allows a heading to be a child of a bullet technically.
And that's where I was going with that as well. I guess at the end of the day, I'm questioning the value of doing it at all. Right. Because I think the point you and I are making is, listen, the point that I was making when we first started talking about this is I'm like, listen, from a design standpoint, you're throwing a heading in between numbered items.
Right.
It is what it is. Right.
Yeah.
Now, when you read it, it's going to read the correct number. So you're going to know that after this heading, you start on number 15. Right. Even though in theory it's a contiguous list, it's going to be broken into individual lists between those headings.
Well, and I think there's some validity in the fact that it would say, in this case, we're on best interest factor number 1 for Anatoly, that it goes from 15 to 22. So that is 8 items. So you're going to hear list 8 items. So that tells you in this heading, there are 8 there's 8 individual items that are being addressed. I think that's a good thing.
I do too, because the reason they're below that heading is because those items belong to that heading, right? You're categorizing those list items based on the heading structure in the document. So if you're designing it that way and you're visually creating that way, then that's how it should be read from an accessibility standpoint as well. And I don't think it's a barrier. I don't think it's a problem. I think it's just the way the document is structured. Yeah.
Well, so in my research, I remember seeing, because we teach a class, in fact, document testing with NVDA is a class that we teach on a pretty regular basis. And in fact, it's coming up. I don't know, probably by the time this podcast airs, it will be over with, but it was scheduled for July 24th. In fact, that's just a couple weeks away from the time we recorded this podcast. So I doubt it will probably just have passed. But document testing with NVDA, one of the things I remember about that class is, as I was looking through the settings, I remember that there is an actual feature for line numbers in NVDA to turn on the voicing of line numbers. However, after doing a little bit of testing, I realized that line numbers are only voiced by programs that reveal the line number to NVDA.
That support them.
Right.
Yeah.
So a document like Notepad or Dreamweaver would allow for the line number to be accessed. But, and in fact, we tested this with a live Word document, and it does work for Word as well. But in a PDF, the line number is not revealed to NVDA. So it wouldn't help someone to simply turn on line numbers while they're listening to a PDF to be able to know what line number they're on, because that would be a perfect solution. Turn on line numbers and then give me the ability to say, hey, what line number am I on? And then if that number matched the visual number in the legal pleading, then everybody's got the same user experience. But unfortunately, that's not the case.
Yeah. And I think that could be a little bit dangerous, because I mean, you and I see this all the time, where people will like hit return 5 times to get the first visual line of the document to appear lower on the page. Right. And I feel like that you could really get into I'm going to use the term sticky wicket, because the line, how am I trying to say this? The physical line or the physical line number that's associated to the object may not really be the same line that is detected in the document. That would be my concern.
Yeah. So it's really about planning to know whether or not someone is going to be using assistive technology to read the document, designing with accessibility in mind. And unfortunately, people today, it is not their first default method of designing, right? In a perfect world, everybody would just design thinking accessibility is going to be part of the future. So they would think about these types of things, but often it's a court reporter that is using a software that was built in 1975, and that PDF is being generated by some PostScript file, and so then turned into a PDF. It's probably not going to have the programmatic association that we would expect it to have to be a usable for people using assistive technology.
Right. And so, all of this to say, right, and you mentioned it, Dax, designing with accessibility in mind, right? I mean, even though we did a little bit of testing on this, what you would ideally not want to do is just start with some random PDF and try to make it accessible when it has legal pleadings, because it's going to be a pretty hefty lift. It's going to be a load of work. So you want to think about this at the beginning of the process, right? And build it in the source document appropriately as a table. Yeah. I could tell you, I'm already thinking about how I might do this in Adobe InDesign, and it is a little bit tricky, but what you would effectively probably want to do is in your text, make sure that every line ends with a hard return.
Right.
So even though it's flowing right now, you want to go in there and put a hard return after every line. And then in Adobe InDesign, you have the ability to highlight that text and say convert to table. And everywhere that there's a hard return, that's going to become a new row. And everywhere that there is a tab, you could actually use other characters too, but typically it's a tab, that'll become a column. So, you could structure it in the source where you put the pleading number and a tab, and then, break it up into a table so that it would export each line as its own row. The legal pleading is in its own column and the content is in its own column. And it would produce a relatively good experience for users of assistive technology.
I think you could write a script that if someone provided a notepad file that was just no hard returns, just the number, a period, the row, and then another number, a period, and the row, like in sequence, flowing all together. You could write a script that could cycle through that document and break everything into the table it's supposed to be in. But I think that would be highly specialized. I mean, it would take a bit to write that, but I think you could. So if that's your job, then you probably could,
It's really unique work. It's very unique work, right? I mean, this is, I think what we're talking about is a, kind of isolated instances, but
well, I think the main takeaway here really is a couple of things. One, if you're really trying to focus on a person using assistive technology to read your document with legal pleading in it, you really have to start from the beginning. If you are concerned about broken up lists, the reality is you have to ask yourself, is it a barrier? Would someone be confused by the way this is broken up? And in fact, in this case, you wouldn't. It actually creates some clarity because of the heading structure and the numbered continuous lists, right?
Yeah.
If the number system restarted in between each one, then how do you tell if someone says, well, item 6 underneath the heading, whatever, that would be really hard to try to figure out. The best solution for this would be that you use a multi-level outline list in Word. So you would have 1.0 heading level, and then your subtopics are 1.1, whatever that first paragraph is, 1.2, the next paragraph, on down the line. Then your next heading is 2.0. And then the paragraphs below it are 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Then you could have an absolute reference anywhere inside that document to be able to go to the right heading that corresponds to the right outline level. And it would be a really good user experience while having a single cohesive list.
Yeah. Yeah. It all depends on, the effort you put in at the beginning. Right.
Yeah.
It's going to depend on the results that you get. But I think it's a really interesting challenge, that we've talked about today. Right, Dax? I mean,
yeah.
The gentleman that approached us, he kind of came to us and was like, listen, this is what I'm dealing with. And, it was kind of a fun problem, to kind of dissect and discuss. But I'm sure we could apply this to other situations as well, right? I mean, we're talking about legal pleading here, but I'm sure there are other situations where this could be made useful.
Well, I'll tell you a situation that I've run into before, and this was in higher ed. This is actually two situations. One, I was a teacher had asked, "Hey, we're reading Shakespeare, and the book we have has the English the current version, the current vernacular on the left-hand side of the page, and then the Old English version, or the, I don't know, Greek, whatever, the Renaissance version on the right-hand side of the page. And the line numbers all line up. So you can look at line number 1 and see what it's in the old way and then what's the new way. And And so that's where I came up with the idea of the table. Put the one in one column, one in the other, and it allows the user to read down one column or read down the other. So that creates a really good user experience. The other situation that I ran into is when I worked for High Speed Rail. Now, when I worked for High Speed Rail, we had to release a report, and then we had to like submit it to the public for comments. The public would comment on it, and then we would have to take their comments and make adjustments to the document and re-release the document. But we also had to show this is what it said before, and this is what it says now. And often you'll see people do strike-throughs when it comes to that content, Chad. Yeah. And so we would strike through the old content and add the new content in bold or red or something else. Created a terrible user experience for assistive technology, because how do you decipher all that? Yeah. So what we ended up doing is we would take that area and we would add a reference number, a link to it. And then in the back of the document, we would have a 2-column table where it was the original paragraph in its entirety and the new paragraph in its entirety. And it would allow the user to listen to what it said before and then listen to what it says now, without all of the strike throughs and the additions and the nightmare of what that sounds like for a person using assistive technology. So those are the two other situations where you might use this whole, table methodology.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good solution to a seemingly challenging problem. But I think by structuring it in a table, you make it fairly easy. And that shortcut you found for NVDA is like I said, that's the first thing I thought about. Is like, boy, that would really stink to have to read it like row by row, right? And like, okay, pause. But that shortcut, it sounds like, you could just say, read this, and it would read it like it's a contiguous paragraph. Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, hopefully everybody, you got some takeaways here. I think the main takeaway is know the problem before you start designing your document, and then you can design around it. If you're given this as here's a legal PDF, make it accessible, you've got your work cut out for you. And then the other takeaway is that the line numbers feature inside NVDA doesn't really work for legal documents. It works more for coding and HTML coding inside a notepad or something like that. That multi-level outline lists really are the best way to combine heading structure and list structures into one cohesive stream of content. So hopefully this has helped you out.
Yeah. And one of the things I would mention, and maybe this is a nice little tidbit for everybody, because, you and I, we often see documents where people like to use numbered headings in their documents, right? So it'll be like one, whatever the topic is, like 1, blah, 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 2, blah, 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 and they're numbered headings, right?
Right.
Now, if you just use them out of the box, if you will, each heading is going to export as its own separate list. And because it's a heading, you don't really want that to be read as a list.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so you'll end up with a list number, a single L with a single item inside the L. But that's why Word has a cool feature called the multi-level outline list. And that's where usually you see 1.0, 1.1, 1.1.1. And those are all mapped to heading level 1, heading level 2, heading level 3 already inside that. So don't get caught in the trap of using just a regular numbered list. Use that multi-level outline list to be able to have that heading level associated with the correct number. So definitely use that tool to avoid getting caught up in that problem.
And that'll work in Word. It will not work in InDesign. In InDesign, you simply have to map that to a heading so that it outputs as a heading instead of a list.
Right. And you go into that numbered section inside the InDesign for your list setting, and you have to set the 1 point, and then there's a series of hashtags or little symbols you have to set up. It's a little more complex for sure. But if you're in the architectural engineering construction world, AEC, we're used to doing that because that's a lot of what how our proposals and responses are set up. But just know that it can be much more work inside InDesign if you're new to this. So
absolutely. Well, listen, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And just remember, if you're looking for in-person or online training, or just struggling to establish an accessibility program in your organization, head on over to accessibilityunraveled.com to learn more. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where every other week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.